Good day, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar, Marketing Yourself, How to Make Employers Take Notice. My name is Mariana. I'm with Exec, and I will be your organizer today. And now let me introduce Nicholas Constantinescu, our presenter. Nicholas discovered the rewards of coaching and recruiting during his MBA when he coached first-year students on interviewing skills. Since that time, he has made coaching job seekers a personal priority in his work as a consultant. He managed McKinsey London's MBA recruiting and summer associate program for several years, and 2 years ago he began to build a team of operations consultants at KPMG. Last year, marketing expert Joran Rugler and Nicholas launched their own dedicated practice, coaching several hundred MBAs and other candidates through the recruitment process. And with this, I would like to hand it over to Nicholas.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Viviana, and good morning or good afternoon to everybody, and maybe good evening to some. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I think Viviana described actually my background quite well. As I was saying, I think the relevant part for today of my experience and where a lot of the insights that I will share with you comes from, all started really when I was in college, and I started to tutor high school seniors who were struggling in math, and I realized pretty quickly that I really enjoyed that, and that I was actually pretty good at it because I had a good sense of what it took to make math fun. And similarly, I had a very similar experience when I became a second-year interview coach at the University of Chicago as an MBA, and I was providing insights to the first years that they were not hearing elsewhere. So somehow I was really getting a lot of pleasure out of this, and as a result I decided that I would make coaching and recruiting a permanent fixture in what I did. So I became very involved in coaching and recruiting at McKinsey, especially in the recruiting part, where in the end I was responsible for MBA recruitment for all of UK and Ireland. But in particular, I ended up doing a lot of interviews, at least a couple of hundred, if not more. And since then, since leaving McKinsey, I've also been responsible for the whole recruiting of the operations strategy group that I'm building at KPMG in the Netherlands. So we rebuilt a whole recruiting machine from the ground up, processed hundreds of candidates, and I did, as you can imagine, many more interviews there. So now on the side, I also work with MBA programs, mostly in Europe, like INSEAD and Cambridge and so on, where I do the coaching in workshop type formats around how to think about marketing differently or self-marketing differently. So let's go a little bit into that content. Basically, if you think about the typical mistakes that candidates make when networking or interviewing, they fall into basically a few categories. Very often candidates or job seekers don't know what to say, and that makes a lot of sense because it's actually very hard to take a hard look at yourself. You feel a lot of pressure. On the one hand, you feel like you need to sell yourself. On the other hand, you also feel pressure of humility, of modesty, and so it's very hard to gauge what it is that you really want to say. You often struggle to say it in an effective or authentic manner. And very often the pressure of the moment can mean that people give off the wrong signal. So I can tell you I've been many times in interviews where the stress of the candidate means that they ramble because they're just trying to fill in silence, or they've actually shown up in the interview and they don't actually know the messages that they want to convey, or they speak very vaguely, so they start opening their mouth without a clear point. And sometimes there's even body language that can speak quite loudly. The person seems uninterested, not prepared, doesn't really want to be in the room. They don't really know what they want. If you ask them, why do you want to do consulting, they just give very, very generic answers. So all of this can have, most job seekers tend to do this, at least a few of these things. And the result, the impact that it has on recruiters can be actually quite significant. And typically recruiters will disengage if they start to see a pattern like this, or rambling, or a candidate that doesn't know what they want. They'll forget what the candidate said, except the occasional nugget or thing that the candidate said that actually disqualifies them. And if the recruiter is not in a particularly good space, maybe because they're stressed by something else, or maybe because they've had a long day, or maybe because it's the seventh candidate that they're seeing that day, they might even get, on occasion, irritated. Now, all of this isn't necessarily fair, but it is part of the fabric of what's happening. So today, I'm going to try to bring you 3 messages that are quite fundamental about the way that recruiting actually works. And if you are able to embed these messages in the way that you market yourself, you will be far, far, far more effective than 90% of the folks out there. So the first message is that actually recruiters make emotional decisions when they're making hiring decisions. Okay? This isn't about them being irrational. Actually, it's fairly predictable the way in which they make emotional decisions, but I think it's very important to recognize that they make emotional decisions. A consequence of this, message 2, is that you need to show them that you care about what you want to do, that you care about the role you're applying for, that you care about them. And the third message is that you want to establish rapport with the recruiter, and you want to connect with them through storytelling. Once I've shared these messages with you, then I will spend a couple of minutes figuring out what it means in terms of preparing for interviews. So let's go into the first message. Recruiters respond not just to what you say or what you write, they also respond to how you act. This is really quite key. Put another way, winning the recruiting game isn't just about winning people's minds, it's also about winning their hearts. The reality is that recruiters are people like everybody else. There is kind of this tendency to believe that recruiters work a little bit like machines or like robots, and that they know exactly what they're looking for. They have their clear scorecards, and then it's just a matter of playing to those parameters in a very programmatic way. But the reality is that actually recruiters are people like you and me. They have their own hopes and fears. They have their own strengths and weaknesses, their own sources of confidence and their own insecurities, their own need to feel valued, just like you and me, and they respond to very similar stimuli that you and I do. And maybe on the day that they're interviewing you, maybe they're happy to see you because they've been looking forward to it, or maybe they're not because they don't want to be in the interview room that day. Maybe they're distracted by a problem at home or at work. Maybe they've been seeing good candidates all day, which means that the bar is very high, or maybe they've been seeing poor candidates all day, and they're craving to finally meet a good candidate. The point is that they're coming into the interview room in some kind of emotional state that is going to respond to the stimuli that you provide to them. And these stimuli go far beyond the simple things that you just say. They have much more to do with how you act. So let me try to illustrate this through a couple of examples. The important bit here is that the message I want you to retain here is that recruiters make decisions, make emotional decisions. Let me illustrate this through a couple of examples. You might recognize the concept behind this picture. This is a picture behind of a queue in front of the Apple Store right before the iPad 2 launch. So, as you know, every time in the past few years that Apple has come out with a new product, there has been this frenzy. There's been these queues that have started forming for hours before the opening of the store. Sometimes into the night, sometimes the queues going around the clock. For every one of their products that have come out. So the various iterations of the iPhone, the various iterations of the iPad, and so on. Even the iPad 2, which, let's say, was just a marginal change relative to the iPad 1, generated a complete frenzy. It doesn't really feel very rational, does it? Well, it actually isn't rational, but the fact is we can explain it. Let me try to explain it with a different example. There was a survey done a couple of years ago of Android users, and the question that was asked to them was, hey, what might you consider buying an iPhone? And the answers are actually very fascinating. there's about 6% who said, hey, if they can come up with a very cheap option, then I'll buy the iPhone. Then there's another 7% that said, well, I'll get the iPhone if I can get better email and better typing, i.e. it's one of the features of the iPhone that right now is not very good, but if they can improve that, then I'll switch to the iPhone. Then there's about 30% or so who said, hey, I want the iPhone to work better with the non-Apple apps and products because there's actually a lot more out there that right now isn't accessible to the iPhone. So for example, Flash technology. But the most interesting thing is, the biggest block is, you had 55% of people who said nothing. There's nothing you can do to make me switch to Apple because I hate Apple. Decision. This isn't a decision based on features. This is a very emotional decision that I'm making and that I'm even proud to make. This is, I've decided up front that I'm not going to switch to Apple. And then if you really push me, I'll give you a whole host of reasons to explain why. But fundamentally, I've decided that I'm not going to switch to Apple. This is an emotional commitment I'm making against Apple. Let me illustrate this with another example. This is the brochure of BMW's best-selling motorcycle, the R1200 GS. As you can see, the front page, you don't even see the motorcycle. You just see the word adventure, and you see the opportunity to explore your horizon. If you go to the next page, what you see is the motorcycle parked somewhere in Tibet, and you see kind of in the background the driver who is having a walk with a local Tibetan person. This motorcycle, in a sense, or this framing actually fits perfectly for middle-aged men, so people in their late 30s, early 40s, and so on. What is this brochure all about? And what is this motorcycle all about for BMW? What are they trying to do? Well, it's about buying a dream. It's about buying an option, the option to, to put it all to rest and to actually go on an adventure. It's about buying the freedom to escape at a moment's notice. It's about regaining, my own freedom, in a sense, escaping the rat race, and so on. So all these are themes that speak very loudly to people who are kind of at or near the midlife stage. So, as some people call it, the crisis, right? There's a little bit that it's tapping into the people's rebellious streak a little bit. So it's very powerful because it's tapping into a strong sense of emotion, right? And it turns out that if you just keep flipping the pages in this brochure, you'll keep seeing references to this. It's all about playing into that theme. And finally, at the end, on page 15 or 20, finally is the part where you get to the features, which is how much horsepower and fuel economy and the engine size and so on and so forth. Now here's the fascinating thing about this, is that this is BMW's best-selling bike ever. And this is despite the fact that relative to its direct competitors, this motorcycle has less horsepower, it's slower, it's less agile off the road, and it's actually 30 to 40% more expensive. So rationally speaking, this bike is worse. It's worse on features, so it's worse on quality or value, and it's worse on cost. And yet, it is a far better seller than any of its competitors. Why is that? Because again, people make decisions, they make emotional decisions. If you think about the way we make decisions, typically what happens is we think about some key criteria, we immediately root out the stuff that falls out of our targeted range, and then we make an emotional decision. Let me illustrate this with the way that travelers typically select hotels. For example, when they go on Expedia or Hotel.com, or they look at their Lonely Planet or Booking.com or what have you. Typically, they have the first thing that happens in their brain is they have a sense of what what is the price range or the quality range that they want. It's going to be $100 a night, or it's going to be a 3-star. It's going to be something around that. If it's significantly more than that, it's too much, so they eliminate. So price is too high. If it's $200, that's outside of my range. If it's $30, it's outside of my range too, because this is probably just a 1-star, and that's not what I'm looking for. So you first fixate on the range, and then inside that range, the decisions are again made not so much on features per se, but they're made on somewhat, they can be made on somewhat emotive dimensions. It's the same way that recruiters select candidates. There's per se looking at a range, and it needs to fit in terms of the overall skill level and the overall, let's say, cost or salary expectations. But once we're in that range, then the things that start to matter are the likability. How likable is this candidate? How much of a connection this candidate has made with me? How much do I feel like I can trust this person? And this way of making decisions actually isn't unique to recruiting. You can see it in all sorts of settings. Basically, most of the big decisions that we make are governed by emotions. When buying a home, when buying a car, when shopping for clothes or gadgets, when selecting hotels, when voting for politicians, whatever it is, these kinds of big decisions, fundamentally what we do is we first make an emotional decision that we later rationalize. When we explain it to people, then we might go into the explanation about features. But the first governing dynamic is an emotional one. It's about belonging. It's about trusting. It's about identifying with a brand. It's about doing something that resembles who I am, that matches my values. This is the way that we typically make large decisions. And this is the way it works in recruiting or in hiring as well. So now all this can actually be explained through biology. There's been a lot of progress in recent years in understanding how the brain works. And here this is a bit of an oversimplification, but basically the brain has 3 big parts. The first part is the oldest, is called the reptilian complex. And this is basically the piece of the brain that helps ensure our survival, and it kind of governs our motor and bodily functions and so on and so forth. So it's the stuff that helps you understand notions of height, of speed, the reflexes, or maybe when you're trying to avoid a projectile or something like this. That's the reptilian part of the brain. The next part of the brain, the limbic part, is essentially the emotional part. This is the part that controls the feelings and the emotions. This is the part where human connection takes place, where things like trust take place, where this is the part of the brain that helps you decide whether this person is your friend or not. Because you trust that person, because you have an affinity with that person, because there is something, there is this intangible, this je ne sais quoi, that is the piece that makes you believe in that person. Finally, the last part is the neocortex. This is the part that governs the cognitive processes, so the computational aspects, the thinking processes, right? So if you're going to be doing a multiplication 24 by 15, that's the neocortex. If you're going to be structuring, structuring your approach during a case interview, that's going to be the neocortex. All this stuff, if you're learning a particular skill or methodology, that's going to be the neocortex. Now here's the thing. The thing is that the neocortex demands a lot of energy. It demands a lot of energy. All these computations and so on require a lot of energy. And fundamentally the way that we're wired is that we're wired to be lazy because we're wired to conserve energy. So the default is that the limbic brain actually governs the decisions that we make. And thereafter, the neocortex comes in to help rationalize the decisions. This is the biological rooting for the way that decisions, and because recruiters are also people and not robots, this is how they function as well. So if we make decisions like this based on emotion, and if we rationalize afterwards, then the question might be, what are the things that trigger our emotions when someone is speaking to us? Or put another way, What are the things that trigger the emotions of the recruiter when you speak to them? Some of you may have heard about the 7-38-55 rule. This is basically, what this rule is, it illustrates or it captures the impact on your likability and the memorability of your message. So essentially what it says is this, that people will, how much people like you or dislike you, and how much they remember the message that you give them. 7% of that comes from the words you say. 38% of that comes from the tone that you use in saying this. And 55% comes from the body language that comes with it, including the facial expressions and so on. So in other words, the what you say is a tiny, tiny fraction of how much people will like you. Essentially, if you say very monotonically, you know, that you love finance, you say, I love finance. Without passion, without tone, without a body language that follows it, basically, you're not credible. You're not memorable. So what of this is actually tone and body language have 15 times as much impact as what you say. How you say it, how you behave around the things that you say will have that much more impact on how likable you are and how memorable you are. Yeah? And all of these, all three, the words, the tone, and the body language need to act in congruence with one another. If they're misaligned, people will not trust you. And this is just the way we are wired. This is partly where both the reptilian and the limbic brain are at play, because our trusting and non-trusting is partly about survival. So, unfortunately, a lot of candidates come in interviews or networking events, and what they say is often quite misaligned with the tone of voice or the body language. Why is that? Well, because often they say what they think that the other person wants to hear, rather than saying what they actually, rather than actually focusing on a message that is authentic to them. So there you have an incongruence, and immediately the person who detects the incongruence will stop trusting you right away. Yeah? Alternatively, you might be quite authentic, but you are still very much delivering something that is rehearsed, and that is not rehearsed enough to the point that you can deliver it in a natural way. So it feels like you're delivering a message in a very mechanistic way or monotonic way, like very rehearsed way. This, I'm sure you've all seen people do this, and it's quite you notice it right away, right? That it's rehearsed, and it feels not natural. And that is the kind of thing that tends to turn off recruiters as well, because they feel that, hey, this person isn't being himself or herself, so they forget. And because they're lazy, they typically tend to look for reasons to discard a candidate, because that's typically the safer thing to do. So the point is, if you only focus on what you're going to say, but you forget to figure out how you're going to say it and to align the body language with it, then you're missing on 93% of the impact that you could have. And equally, if you choose to say the wrong things, i.e. to say what you think that they want to hear instead of focusing on what you really have to say, then you're going to have this incongruence that is going to make people mistrust you. So this is the part, to summarize. People make emotional decisions when they make big decisions. When they make big decisions, emotions govern their decisions. The neocortex might initially rule out a broad range of choices, but when it comes down to the realistic choices in front of them, this is where emotion kicks in, and they will typically, and people will respond very much to the things you say and how you say them and body language that goes with them. So how do you then leverage the fact that people that recruiters make emotional decisions. The most important thing is to show them that you care. Let me explain what I mean by this. I'll show you a very classic consultant framework. This is the famous skill-will matrix. One of the classic problems or challenges that job seekers have when they go to networking events or recruiting events or in the interview room is they only talk about why they're qualified. So they'll talk about they'll maybe talk about their achievements, they'll talk about all the skills that they have and so on, but they'll only talk about why they're qualified for the particular role that they're seeking. And they're missing the other dimension, which is why they're interested, why this job that they're looking for actually means something to them, why this company that they're applying for actually has resonance for them. And yet, the irony is that talking about and showing the will part, the why you're interested part, is the stuff that actually has a more impact on the emotions, even more than the skill stuff. So, at the risk of oversimplifying, I'll tell you this. If you can demonstrate that you're passionate, then they will look for reasons to argue that you're qualified. This is a little bit oversimplified, but it does capture the essence of the way that recruiters make decisions. So think of this other dimension, which is not just why you're qualified, but also the will part. You can think of it a little bit as expression of passion. So showing your will is important because, first, your will in and of itself is important, but also demonstrating is important because people will believe that you're going to go the extra mile if you're in a job that really means something to you. They'll believe that you're reliable because they'll know that it's important, that this job is important to you. And they'll believe that if you have some skill gaps, that those skill gaps are more likely to be coachable because you will want to close those gaps because this job means something to you. But even better than that, if you really are in the interview room talking about a job that you're passionate about, alternatively, if you really let your passion out, what's going to happen is you're actually going to become more self-confident. People naturally are more self-confident in the areas that they're passionate about. They bring more energy in the areas that they're passionate about. And that has a huge effect on recruiters. Self-confidence, high energy, these are contagious things. These are the kinds of things that make the other person in the room excited. They're the kinds of things that give them energy. They're the kinds of things that actually make them believe that, hey, because you're so excited about this, you deserve this job. But also showing that this job or this company, this role, is something that you're passionate about or that means something to you. It also means that you are establishing a shared sense of purpose with your recruiter or the person in front of you. As in, there is something that you and that person share in common. That makes you trustworthy. It's the basis or a basis for an emotional connection with that person. It's in a sense, a basis from which this person can make the emotional decision to recommend your hiring and then come up with the so-called rational arguments to justify that. Yeah? So what's important is not just that you be passionate about it, but also that you demonstrate that. Both are hugely important. Yeah? Even if recruiters are not looking for that, the fact is, because they're people, they will respond to it. That's the simple reality of the fact that they're humans. So how do you show will? Well, you can think back to a little bit to the 738-55 rule, but partly is you need to think about what you're going to talk about. So, for example, I find that one of the things that's very effective is when candidates talk about the why behind the decisions that they've made. So rather than saying, hey, I got this first job at Ford in finance, and then I stayed with Ford and took a job in marketing, they explain why they went from the first job to the second. because underpinning these decisions, there's a spine, there is some kind of emotive affect. There is something that drives them, and as they talk about the way or how the decisions they've made, the why behind the decisions, then I understand what drives these people. And if I believe then that the job we're talking about fits into what drives them, then I can start to believe that this job means something to them. So talking about the why behind your decisions, I'm talking explicitly about the things that you're passionate about, what gives you energy, making explicit links between your target job and your passion. So all these kinds of things, talking explicitly about all these kinds of things helps to demonstrate your will, if you will. Then, of course, there's the how you talk about it. So this is the tone, the facial expressions, the body language. Actually, in other words, it comes down to really revealing yourself, really showing your true persona as you talk about the stuff that makes you passionate. And then there's a question about when to talk about it. And here, the simple answer is all the time. Every time, every contact point that you have with a recruiter or potential recruiter is an opportunity to market yourself, is an opportunity to actually demonstrate who you are from a professional standpoint. So it can be networking events, interviews, cover letters, LinkedIn profile, what have you. So this is the piece around showing them in the sense that you care about the job that you're applying for, you care about the direction that you want to take, that maybe you've already started taking. In other words, that it's important to you. If you show them that what you want to do, the direction you want to go is important to you, then they will see that this is something that actually means something to you, and you're starting to tap into the emotional part of their brain, and they're much more likely to root for you. So now, ultimately, how do you make the ultimate connection with the recruiter? Well, storytelling is actually it's an incredibly powerful device. Let me try to illustrate this by with what you should not do. So one of the common mistakes that candidates make is they only tell. So there's this adage that says, don't tell me that you're funny, make me laugh instead. So in other words, what you want to do is not just tell people, you want to show people. You don't want to just claim, you want to demonstrate. You don't want to just say that you have these analytical skills and interpersonal skills and so on. You want to demonstrate that. You don't want to just say that you're excited about a particular industry or a particular job or what have you. You want to actually prove that. So the way to do this is, well, the way that you want to prove your skills is by talking about accomplishments. There are these mini stories or anecdotes about your accomplishments using the classical STAR method. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Similarly, the way that you talk about or that you want to demonstrate your will is about talking about your choices, talking about your passion, and we've just discussed, and of course demonstrating that. And the way that it all hangs together is in your story, your personal story. The story of when you began, and this isn't when you were born, but when your when your professional persona started. When your professional persona started, and where you've been, what places you've been to, and where are you going. That story is kind of the spine that holds together the different phases of your professional life, including college, including job 1, job 2, maybe business school or what have you, and the next job. It's a story that has a beginning, that has an end, which isn't written yet, but that has a present, and that present is going into some kind of future, and it somehow all makes sense. So if you can create the meaning, the clarity out of this, you will make it much easier for the recruiter to understand what you're all about, to make sense out of all the bullet points that are in your CV in a much simpler way. And doing it in storytelling fashion will help you to create that connection with the recruiter. If you think about storytelling, it's actually quite central to human culture. I often think, hey, if we were ever one day to meet with, encounter another civilization out there in space, maybe one of the things that would differentiate us from them, aside from physical traits, is the fact that storytelling is so central to who we are as humans. It exists in all cultures. The first book that was ever written was a story. One of the most important people in Judeo-Christian history, Jesus, was essentially a storyteller or a parable teller. One of the most important rituals for children before going to bed is they want to hear stories. Why are stories so important? Why are they so powerful? Well, stories help to create connection. If you think about the way, for example, somebody who's trying to sell you something, if they try to push a product on you, you're going to even feel you're going to feel yourself getting tense and trying to close off that person. You feel that the person is trying to push something on you. But if they say, hold on, can I just tell you a story? Then what you'll typically tend to do is you'll typically kind of open up, sit back and relax, because you don't have to do anything whilst listening to a story. So stories are a very powerful way of actually getting your listener to relax and to actually listen. And ultimately, stories help create that human bridge. I love these quotes here, but ultimately, it's stories help to create meaning, or they help to capture meaning. As Brené Brown said, stories are data with a soul, so it helps to make sense out of it, and it helps ultimately people to connect. If I tell you my personal story with the challenges that I've had, the things that have made me human along the way, then you and I will have a basis to connect. You will see my humanity as I tell you my story, as I share with you some of my concerns, some of my weaknesses, some of my vulnerabilities. And this is hugely powerful because people relate to others with whom they can sympathize, and even better, with whom they can empathize. They will root for people that they see as being similar to them. Classic mistake of a lot of people who recruit is they try and present a perfect picture. They're perfect. They have all these skills. Every mistake they've made, they've turned it into an achievement. Every setback they've had, everything is perfect. And here's the reality: is whenever we have somebody who's perfect in front of us, we can't relate because we don't think of ourselves as perfect. So we can't relate, and if we can't relate, we don't trust that person. So we dismiss. That's why storytelling, authentic storytelling, can actually be hugely powerful in helping you to create connection with the recruiter. And to start, you want to start with your own story. So stories are, well, movies in a sense are like stories. Stories only focus on what's relevant. If you think about a movie, it's typically an hour and a half long. It might cover a period of, let's say, 5 years. Clearly, only the things that are relevant to the story are shown in the movie. So resist the temptation to tell everything. A lot of people have the temptation to want to tell everything. But it doesn't help because so much isn't relevant. So you should only talk about the stuff that is relevant. Let me share with you an example of a story here quickly. This is a story about an airline guy. This is a friend of mine. This is an airline guy. His whole life has been about airlines. Ever since he was a kid, he wanted to know how airline. He loved plane models and so on. And basically here he started as a pilot at United. Then he did an airline MBA because he wanted to move into business, into the management side of things. Then he became a management consultant because he wanted to learn very quickly, become broad quickly. And here there's a couple of achievements that I'm going to skip. And in the end, now he's at a stage where he has 10 years of operational experience in hands-on management consulting, and he's looking to take on an executive role in airline management. What this doesn't talk about is his experience in banking, all the banking clients that he served, because to a large extent, it's not really relevant to his story. The point is, if he goes with a story like this to airline management teams where he tries to pitch himself, this is going to really resonate, because of course the airline executives that he's going to be trying to convince are going to love the fact that he's so passionate and that he's been so consistent. So what could a story structure look like? Well, here's an example, and I find this is always a good way to start. I think it's always really important to start with a crisp statement of who you are from a professional standpoint. I am an airline guy. I am a customer about coaching in the space of recruiting. I am a cost killer. Whatever it is, start with a statement of who you are, what you stand for, the thing or the couple of things that make you passionate as a professional. And then retrace the key phases of your professional life through that lens. And show progression. Show how phase 2 built onto phase 1, which built and then phase 3 built on that, and explain how you transitioned or the why you transitioned from phase 1 to phase 2. And here phase 1 can be the first job, phase 2 can be the second job. It doesn't really matter. And finish the story with a vision of where you're going, a vision of your future, and in that vision include the next step, which is, well, I see this job as a controller at Delta Airlines as part of my future, because I see it as a building block towards what I ultimately want to achieve, which is, maybe run a small airline or what have you. So this is a good structure. I would recommend start playing with a structure like this and change it only when you master it. Let me share with you a couple of examples of great stories, people with great stories that I've met along the way. I think it's important to remember that stories, they're not just, they can be industry-based, they can be functionally based, or they can be topical-based. So we talked about the airline guy. Let me tell you, the health and wellness, this person, Elsa. Everything she's done pretty much has been really consistent around this theme of health and wellness. She studied biological engineering. Then she went to Goldman and did equity research in biotech and healthcare. So there's clearly that link with the health and wellness. In her personal life, she's a trained massage therapist, and she volunteers for people with mental disabilities. There's something utterly consistent about what this woman does. There's something, this theme of health and wellness is like something that means something to her. It's something that has, that is bigger than who she is. It's almost like a cause that she serves on some level. She's genuinely passionate about it. So when she's applying for roles in sectors that are connected to this, she's completely credible. Assuming, of course, that she articulates it well, but she's completely credible. So her message is completely aligned with actually who she is as a professional in terms of what drives her. I'll give you another example. This woman that I met at Cambridge, Julie, the IPO woman, she's quite an awesome character. This woman is just passionate about IPOs. She loves everything that IPOs stand for and represent. She loves the fact that IPOs represent a critical milestone in the maturing of a business, of an organization. She loves IPOs so much that this is the very nerdy part of her, she thinks that she sees the IPO book, this 700-page document, she sees that as a work of art. Now, most of us wouldn't. Most of us might think an IPO book is an incredibly dry thing, but she doesn't. And if you're the person who's considering to hire her in your M&A team, I mean, of course you're going to take somebody who thinks that an IPO book is a work of art, because she's going to go the extra mile, because she's going to do everything with passion, because because the passion oozes out her pores. So it's bigger than she is. And there are many more examples, as you can see here. All of these are examples that go beyond the boring, oh, I'm interested in consulting, or that transcend the generic stuff that we typically tend to hear, and that we hear because people focus on telling us what they think they want us to hear. So let's talk about then implications for interviews very quickly. So there was a survey done not so long ago that asked recruiters, hey, what are the things, amongst the best candidates that you've seen, what are the traits that you saw? And basically 6 things came out. I looked at all the quotes. I mean, it was hundreds and hundreds of quotes, and I basically summarized it, and I saw 6 themes emerge. One is there's a compelling story. In other words, this person knows what he wants, knows where he's going. Everything he's done has been consistent. The skills are strong and relevant. This person was clearly interested and prepared. These are the things at the top are really on the content front. At the bottom is things that are really much more, that they're really about winning the heart. It's, hey, this person was enthusiastic. She was excited to be in the room. She was excited about the prospects of this job, like what it could mean to her, what she could do in it, how she could grow in it, and so on. This person also built a rapport with me, the recruiter. So she was interested in me, the person, and she wasn't just here for the content reasons. And ultimately, this person was a sharp communicator, as in, the communication was top-down, clear, punchy, to the point. And I think I hope you'll recognize that all these are themes that we've been talking about, which is about essentially being clear about, first it's having a message that is authentic, that reflects your sources of passion, that is therefore consistent with your interests, and consistent with the skills that you have. So how do you achieve, in a sense, the state of nirvana in the case of interviews? Well, in other words, how do you project this to the recruiters? Well, you're probably not going to be surprised that it all comes down to practice and preparation. So, in other words, if you actually prepare for your interviews, or if you prepare for your networking events, if you prepare enough, you're first going to get to a stage where content-wise you're ready, as in you know the messages that you want to bring. And just being ready content-wise, as opposed to making it up during the interview, that means you're going to have a better interview already, because you're coming in with messages that are thought through. But even better than that, because you're content-wise ready, you're going to be arriving at that interview with confidence, because you're going to be confident that you have the right things to say. You're going to be confident that you have the right strategy for the interview. And because you're confident, you're going to be able to perform that much better, or as I call it, doubly better. Yeah? And the impact of confidence that we've talked about is huge, because it's not just the impact it has on you, it's also the impact it has on the interviewer. If you believe in yourself, there's a good chance that the interviewer will also believe in you. If you don't believe in yourself, it will come across, and certainly the interviewer will not believe in you. So preparing not only makes you content-wise ready, but it also gives you the confidence. So how do you prepare? Well, you plan a strategy, you practice, you capture the learnings, and you keep doing this until it comes out naturally. In fact, if you think about a message that you deliver, how clear it is and how authentic it sounds. Well, if you haven't practiced, you're probably going to be relatively authentic. It's just that nobody's going to understand what you're trying to say. The clarity of the message is going to be very low. If you start practicing, so you figure out the message you want to tell and you start practicing to tell it, you're going to get to that bottom of the curve where content-wise everything you're going to say is going to sound right, but you're not going to sound authentic, because essentially this is the part where you're going to sound rehearsed. This is the stage where you're still, in other words, when you're in the interview room, either you know exactly the words you want to say, or you're still just a little bit trying to remember the words that you want to say, but to remember the overall message. But still, you haven't found a natural way of saying it. Now, if you keep practicing, you're going to get to a point where actually the right messages are going to start coming out in a natural way with your words. And that is when you are really at the top of performance, because you're delivering an authentic message that is clear. And then you don't get lost in the detail, you only say the things that are important. So if you actually think about the structure of an interview and what you should do, it's very simple. In the opening, there's a 90-95% chance that the first real question is going to be, tell me about yourself, or walk me through your CV. Here, this is your opportunity to tell your story, the overall story, the 120-second version of the story. In the middle, when the interviewer shoots a whole bunch of questions at you, this is your opportunity to tell the anecdotes or the stories about your achievements and experiences, the ones that you've planned before. So you've planned this ahead of time. And you just wait for the right question to deliver a message or an anecdote that you've decided up front you were going to deliver. And at the end, you summarize the interview with a closing argument, which fundamentally comes down to why you're qualified, the skills, and why you want it, why this is important. So at that point, you don't introduce any new evidence. It's just a summary of why you're qualified and why you want it. That's how you should conduct an interview. At the end of the day, the best interviewers or the best candidates are actually in control during the interview. And the good news is, as I was mentioning, you can align you can align the message you want to tell with the questions that come. At the end of the day, there's not that many different interview questions. 80% of them are about you in general, completely open-ended, as in like walk me through your resume. They're about skills, but like, again, very open-ended, like, hey, tell me about your greatest strengths. They might be about your interpersonal skills, so these are typically the behavioral interviews. They'll be about your drive, or your passion, so where do you see yourself in 10 years, why do you want this job, and so on. So it's about your will. And then there's going to be questions about the specific role that you're applying for or the specific company or sector. But it's one of those themes. And if you already know the messages that you want to tell, you just need to somehow make the connection between the question that you get and the message that you want to bring to the table. So, in summary, this brings us to the end. So, in summary, I'd like to reiterate the key messages, which is recruiters are people. They will respond to stimuli. They will make decisions that are emotional. They will make the decision about you in an emotional manner. And that decision is going to be based on whether they believe the story that you tell them and whether they root for you. So connect with them. Use storytelling to connect with them, and practice. Practice for your interviews and your networking. Thank you. So I guess this opens it up for the Q&A.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nicholas. So I would recommend all our attendees to type in as many questions as they have. We still have time to answer. Here is the first one that we got, and the question is, do you suggest then as a candidate we do not reveal salary expectations or give a range or stay competitive?
This is a very, very technical question. I think what's always most important is first to establish the fact that there's a fit, as in like, do you really want this job? Do you really want to be in this company, and so on and so forth, before talking about price. If they really insist, yes, give the overall range if you think that's appropriate. But I would typically tend to push that question to the end and say, you know, I trust that we'll find an agreement, but let's just, if we get to that, but let's just first establish that, you know, we are a good fit for each other.
Great, thanks. Here's the next one. Do you adjust your approach at all from first round or phone to second round in person with the junior employees to final round senior employees?
Not a whole lot. I mean, you might make some tactical adjustments. I mean, obviously, with more junior employees, you're going to you need to level with the people that you're talking to. The more junior employees they will understand maybe a bit less your talk about strategy, for example, than more seniors. So there's an element of tactically leveling with them, but the overall message should be the same, and it should be a message that is again aligned with what you genuinely want to do, what your sources of passion are, and either in all instances you should deliver that message with city and not monotonically.
Great. The next question is if you could maybe refresh the STAR method for attendees.
Oh, the STAR method, yes.
Yes.
So the STAR method is situation, task, action, result. Essentially, what it means is first describe what the context was. That's for the situation. Task, actually, I prefer the word problem, which is then what's the problem that needed to be solved, then what's the action that you took, and then what was the result. It actually follows very much the script that you'll see in any kind of movie, where there's a situation, then there's a conflict, and then there's some kind of resolution. Every movie, every book or novel, etc., has a starting context, a complication, and ultimately a resolution. So it's the same thing as you talk about your achievements, and you aim for a 90-second version of the situation, complication, resolution. And in most of the literature, they refer to it as STAR, situation, task, action, result. Or you can think of it as SPAR, situation, problem, action.
Great. The next one. How much does this approach relate to management consulting case interviews, such as BCG, McKinsey?
I love that question. Excellent. So obviously, case interviews, the content of what you're going to be talking about is predetermined by the case. However, all of the emotional stuff is hugely impactful. Let me give you an example. If you show that you find a particular case interesting, if you show how you think a particular question that the interviewer gives you is actually a relevant question, like, oh yeah, okay, excellent, etc. If you show the interest, then you increase dramatically the chances that the recruiter will make the emotional decision to root for you and then look for reasons to justify it. Why is that? There's a good chance that if this person is giving you this case, that this person worked on that case. So, and if he or she chose it for the interview, that means it's a case with which they have an emotional affect. So if you validate their choice by saying essentially, hey, I think this case is interesting, then you're ultimately stroking the recruiter's ego. By contrast, if you kind of give the impression that you think this is not interesting, then the reaction you're generating inside the recruiter's head, even though they show it to you, is, well, if you don't think the work I'm doing is interesting, it's not a good reason for you to join my team. So I think it's hugely important. Working the interviewer is hugely important. Hugely important.
Okay, the next question, do we still have time for a few more, Nicholas?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. How do you adjust your story to time constraints?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question here, but let me tell you this. I would encourage everyone to have a 90-second version of their story, and also a 20-second version of their story. So the 20-second version is the piece that you're going to use to introduce yourself at a networking event. Make a splash in 20 seconds to get the right kind of attention. The 90-second version is the piece that you use to tell me about yourself or to walk me through your resume, and which serves as the frame for everything that follows during the interview or during the discussion.
Perfect. Here's the next one. Storytelling works when applying on LinkedIn. How would you generate an interview from an online application?
Yeah, so I think so let me try to answer this one a little bit differently. So there's very often the question comes up, hey, should I put a summary or an objective at the top of my resume. And I think this is a high risk, high reward thing. If you actually put a crisp, differentiated summary of who you are as a professional, what you stand for, what you're aspiring to do at the top of your resume, then everything that follows from then I will read everything that follows through the frame that you create. So if you create the right frame, then you're making everything else that follows that much more powerful. I think it's the same thing in LinkedIn. You want to manage you want to proactively manage the image that you convey. And I think it's by having a crisp summary of who you are as a professional. What are the things that excite you? What are the, if it's an industry or a topic or what have you, and a vision of where you're trying to go.
Perfect. And I think this is the last question for today. I just want to let everyone know that you can still ask any questions you may have and contact Nicholas directly. But let's answer this one first. How would the 738-55 rule adjust for a phone-only interview? Without body language or facial expression, how can you shine through with words and tone only?
Yeah, good. Well, good question. Obviously, the 55 disappears. So I would first say, if you can avoid the phone interview and do it in person, aim for that. Alternatively, aim for Skype if you can. But if you can't, then you still have the tone, which is 38. So that's 5 times as important, as impactful as wording. So the point is, you still want to practice. You still want to practice beforehand, during the interviews and telling the messages that are important to you, telling them in an authentic way. So practice telling them, practice until it really comes out naturally. Just like I hope that you felt on occasion that in the past hour I've really believed in the messages that I was trying to convey to you all. I think you can sense that in somebody who's talking with you. You can sense that even if you can't see their facial expression and their body language, if they really believe what they're saying, you will hear the conviction in their tone. But to get to that point, you need to get over the nervousness and all this kind of stuff, all these inhibitors. And the best way to get over these inhibitors is to practice.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicholas. First of all, I would like to thank you for an amazing presentation. We still have a few questions coming in, but we're a little bit short with time. So as I mentioned, the presentation is recorded. We will follow up with everyone who registered and attended with the recording and the slide deck and, of course, the contact information for Nicholas. And I would like to thank you all for attending today. I wish you all a great day.
Cool.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.